Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you for joining me. Today, we will be looking at the key findings of the Digital News Report, Australia 2018, and what it means for media and communication professionals in government and the public sector. Now, this particular study is commissioned by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford, and it looks at how news is consumed in 37 different countries around the world. In Australia, that particular piece of work is carried out by the News and Media Research Centre at the University of Canberra. Now, we will have a discussion today with a colleague and a friend of mine, Caroline Fisher, who is an assistant professor of communication and journalism at the University of Canberra. She researches political communication and journalism with a focus on politicians' use of social media and the citizens who follow them. She previously has worked for the ABC as a journalist, and she was an advisor to the former Queensland Premier Anna Bligh. And she joins me in the studio, Assistant Professor Caroline Fisher. Welcome.
What a very grand opening. Hi, David. Lovely to be here.
I knew you when you weren't an assistant professor.
That's right. In a previous life as an ABC journalist. That's right.
Hey, now listen, give us the top line. Give us the bigger picture. What's the change? What's happening this year in terms of the consumption of news media?
Look, this report it's full of firsts for Australia. It's a tipping point type of report.
Okay.
So we're seeing this for the first time. We're seeing the consumption of online news sources overtake traditional offline, so TV, newspapers, etc. So the shift has finally occurred. We've all been talking about it, that it's going to happen. It's happened in Australia. This year it's happened. The other thing we're seeing, we've had another first, that the mobile phone, the mobile device, has overtaken other forms of, computer, desktop or laptop for the access of online news. So now the mobile phone is more Australians are using that to access news than any other device, for online. And we're also seeing an increase in news consumption, big jump, that we are consuming news, more often. More of us are doing it more often. Okay.
So rolling all of those things together, I don't think any of that is a massive surprise. Were you, as the academics, looking at it thinking that was a big surprise?
No,
or is that...
it's something, these trends, like I say, everything's been pointing to it, and everyone's been saying, oh, look, with the younger generations, it's definitely a generational shift, because we've known that they've been online or using social, and so we've been predicting that this would happen. But we didn't know how quickly it was going to happen. We didn't know when it was going to happen. And so, like I say, for this year, we've really seen that tipping point. It's marched over that online and social, that is now leaving traditional behind. Okay. And as, these younger consumers, particularly, amongst young Australians, absolutely social media is the main way they're getting news. So, as they get older, we can't see them necessarily returning to other forms. So we are seeing this march ahead, and I think, like I say, yes, it was predicted, but the pivot has happened.
Okay. But if that's what's happened, what does it mean? What's the relevance of it? What's the change, and what's the impact of this change?
Well, look, if I put my, press secretary hat on back from the good old days, depending on who you're trying to reach, it really, really should absolutely dictate the way you are trying to communicate. If now mobile phones are the main ways that people are accessing online information, that completely changes the way you actually present that information on, the online mobile presentation is different to general online presentation, as is different to, any other type of, whether it's broadcast or newspapers. So from layout through to, size of photographs, types of photographs, headlines, all the rest of it. Mobile now, you've really got to be thinking about small screens and eyeballs on small screens, because that's where everyone, that's the main device now. And very much that, yes, if everyone is going online, if that's where people are, depending on your demographic, then, yeah, you need to be absolutely using designing your campaign around online. But can I say it's not everyone, with TV. Strangely enough, it is still, it is still the main source of news for a lot of people, and for very large section of the community. But it's very based on age. I mean, and I can give you the age demographics of who's where. But TV, 45 plus is still TV, pretty much. 35 to 45 is online and TV. 24 to 34 is online, and then 18 to 24 is social.
But is that changing when we see, because I just think about my own experience, and I look at some of my relations who are a bit older than I am, and I see the uptake that they have, particularly my 90-year-old aunt is mad on Facebook.
No, totally. So, I mean, these are trends, okay? So when I say, the main source of news for a particular age group, so you'll say, well, the bulk of that age group falls into that. Of course, ultimately what we're seeing is that Australians, as are everybody in a world with an internet connection, we're all poly users and poly platform users.
Yeah.
So we're consuming news across multiple platforms, or information across multiple platforms. We're not only very few people only watch television anymore.
Yeah.
So that's right. So my mum is on Facebook too, and she's 80. So but she absolutely gets, she might be on Facebook, but she doesn't read news on Facebook.
Right.
She gets her news from the ABC TV 7 o'clock appointment bulletin.
Yes.
Or still gets the Sydney Morning Herald. Yeah. So, yes, poly users, but certainly you see in key demographics there are still main sources of news that the majority, or the biggest chunk of that age sector is using.
Now, you gave us a bit of an insight there before, because this podcast obviously is for...
Big rise in podcasts, by the way.
No, well, that doesn't surprise me. I think, we can come to a discussion about podcasts in a moment, because I think that, the ubiquity of the phone, the ease of being able to, as you walk, listen, as you walk the dog, as you exercise, you can fill in that space with podcasts. Like, I'm mad for it. It's transformed the way I consume audio. Like, I don't listen to radio news bulletins anymore, because what I do is bring to myself the information, education and entertainment that I want. So I curate my own.
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in what, some producer might want to tell me in somewhere. So
God, that is so interesting. We should come to that, hold that thought about this control that you want over your information diet.
Yes.
And that you are wanting to make the decisions about what's in it rather than a journalist, because that's exactly why people are following politicians on social media, for that very reason. So let's come back to that.
So let's come back to that. But let's then just look at this change, and you sort of alluded to it before about, if I am a government communicator, I have to be thinking mobile.
Oh, yeah.
I have to be thinking design. Fundamentally, what are the shifts and what are the skills that I am going to have to pick up to be an effective government communicator in this new environment? This is a different world. This is a different place. So what skills am I going to have, and what mindset am I going to have to be able to best represent the policy, the program, the service, or the regulation on behalf of my government?
Look, I think the mindset is, who is my audience and how do I best speak to them? And it wouldn't matter what the technology was, that's got to be your mindset. It's not about the traditional skills that you always had, or the press release, or whatever it is, the email. It's got to be, where is my audience? Now, if your audience is young, then you've got to be thinking, okay, well, where are they? Yeah. And how do I get to them? And do I speak in their language? And all the rest of it, okay?
So it's this personalisation, really. And first of all, audience first, but then personalisation to that particular, if there is such a thing as a grouping anymore. I'm not quite sure that there is. This audience of one really is taking over my thinking, that really, everybody's different.
Well, that's right. And I think that's one of the things you see is when you go onto online services or you subscribe to whatever, they ask you, well, how do you want to receive your information? You can receive it in 105 ways. Which one suits you best? Yeah. And so I guess giving people those options is the way to go.
But how do you keep up? Like, I'm a government communicator, and I'm getting, every other day I'm, going to a barbecue and someone's telling me about a new emerging platform that you've got to be on because this is where those people are.
I know.
It is overwhelming. I've got so many things to do. How am I going to stay on top of it?
you have to play with it yourself. You just have to be exposed to it. You just have to go to where it is, and you've got to play with it, and you've got to experiment with it and try it out and take risks and see if it works. There is no other way around it. How have we ever done anything? It's just that it's happening at such a fast pace.
Yeah.
It used to happen slowly. We'd go from reel-to-reel tape to a cassette to a CD, but that all happened over the pace of 20 years, not a new platform every 6 months. So. There is no way around it other than
there's no magic solution really around this stuff and trying to keep up. There's nothing that you can say as an assistant professor, here is my advice to you.
My advice to
government
you
communicator.
is to go with the flow.
Okay.
Look, as I teach my journalism students, there are core skills, there are core ways about communicating clearly and the use of language and things like that. But the way you adapt them to different technologies and different platforms, that's platform specific. I can't teach my students how to use every single social media platform in the world. But there are lots of apps and online places and lynda.com and online resources to teach them how to use the latest app. I teach them, the best way to communicate, the basics, that are universal and then can be applied anywhere. Of course, I teach them the difference between sort of, mobile communication versus online or TV. But beyond that, trying to teach them, in class, the difference between, the intricacies between Snapchat and Reddit and every other thing. Ultimately, I'd give them an assignment to do that and they can go and find out for themselves. But that's actually the best way to find out.
Sure.
Is to have a look and give it a go, and that's all you can do. And at the end of the day, people end up using what they feel comfortable with. Yeah. However, as communications professionals, we do have to know, we just have to learn how to use it, whether we're comfortable with it or not.
Yeah. Understand the basics, jump in, test and learn, refine, get on with it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And overcome the fear. I think that's the thing. I think we all, and I'm getting older and I'm having to teach younger people all these new things. At the end of the day, you do just have to jump in and not worry. And I think the thing is, of course, the space in which we write and communicate now is getting smaller and smaller all the time, and the time allocated to read this information is getting smaller and smaller all the time. That we worry about, is it right? Is it accurate? All accuracy and all of that's really important, but we mustn't get so hung up. We really do have to think about speed and getting stuff out there, and not worry so much about am I an expert in this before I use it. Yeah. No, use it and learn, and sometimes you can communicate your inexpertise. It doesn't matter. It's part of the conversation. It's social.
Sure. Okay, well, let's go to that point that we were going to... Let's pick back up that point from just a couple of minutes ago. This notion of choice, this notion of control in the audience. So I've understood the basics. I'm testing and learning. I'm jumping in. I'm doing what I can, but I'm trying to create a relationship with a particular part of the community, a particular group, whoever that may be. But they have, as Les Hinton, Rupert Murdoch's right-hand man, I heard him say it the other day on a podcast. He talks about people now having infinity in the palm of their hands. This is the phone. This is that ability to be able to have whatever they like, choosing, controlling what they're going to draw to them. So is that something that came out of the research as well, this massive shift or change that people are now much harder to get to because they are only consuming what it is that they're looking for?
So there's a couple of things to that. Yes, we have infinity. So what that shows, though, is that actually people are, I think because they can now access it, and often for free, people have arranged to, access to so many different sources. So we find that people are accessing a lot of news sources, and not, there's a big section of the community that's reading 3, 4, or 5 plus news sources online. So that's got to be a good thing. Yeah, there's also still a section of the community that's not doing that. Yep. But still, there's availability, and people are taking advantage of it. So that's a good thing.
Yep.
And I've now lost my train of thought. You're going to have to bring me back there. So yeah, can you bring me back to?
No, well, it's back to this point of choice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what we have found then as well is that people, particularly in relation to politicians and following politicians, which we asked these particular questions last year, but we followed up on these who's following politicians again this year. One of the big reasons, there are two main reasons why people follow politicians and parties on social media. One is because they support it, But equally, and if not slightly higher, is because they want to access information that is unfiltered by other people. They want to read it for themselves, get it straight from the horse's mouth, and not have it edited, filtered, whatever, by journalists.
Okay.
And that's why they do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But this sense of control, though, if I'm a government communicator and I've got this force field up around them, around their choice and their control, again, what is the best way to connect with them? What is the best way to create that relationship, to get my story through in this world of, infinite choice? How do I earn a share of their time and their attention?
Oh, my God, David. It's $1 million question, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's a big challenge.
Yeah, it is a really big challenge. It depends on who your demographic is, really.
Yeah.
Younger people, on the whole, they're not as interested in news and politics and stuff as older people.
Yeah.
But
I think there's ways around that, though, isn't there?
There's a way you present it. So you might have to just present it in a less formal way, less, traditionally present it less as reportage and more engaging or entertaining in some other way. It's all about presentation, yeah.
Well, and relevance to me. I think
absolutely.
Relevance is the key. Is being able to,
the key,
which goes back to that point around audience and really knowing your audience and using as many sources as you possibly can, both informal and formal, qualitative and quantitative, to give yourself your best chance by understanding what it is that people are interested in whatever particular area that you're operating in, and being able to be consistent, useful, relevant over time.
One thing that I absolutely would do as much as possible, okay, by all means do your packaged material, whatever it is that you're doing, but I would then also put up the unedited version, or whatever, put up the full interview.
Yep.
Don't just put up the 10-second grab. I would put up the unedited, interview. I would put up live stream, whatever you're doing. People do seem to want to be able to go and check for themselves to see the comment in context and not just the selection that you made. Whether you're a content marketer or whether you're a journalist, you are making selections.
Sure.
And so what do you leave out, what you put in.
So the more
consumers are very savvy to that, and they think, what else did that person say?
Right.
I didn't get to hear the rest of what that person said, and was it taken out of context?
Yeah.
Put the whole thing up there. Have your nice little package with your music and graphics and whatever it is and your key message. But then I'd have the full interview there as well for those who want more, who want to hear it unedited.
Yeah.
I think that's a strong feeling that I get from particularly these information-hungry people.
Yeah.
They really want unedited information.
And how many people are information hungry as a percentage of the population?
Okay.
And is it growing? It seems to.
Yeah, it is growing.
The survey seems to suggest that people are looking for more.
Yeah. So we've had a 15% rise this year in people who are accessing news more than once a day.
Okay, that's
huge.
a lot.
That's
huge.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you who's accessing it 10 or more times a day. I can get that for you. It's in the report. But that's a big increase.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what's driving that?
Look, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I mean, what we're seeing is we've also seen an increase in trust in news. We've seen this increase in access to news. Australians have always been big news consumers.
Yeah.
We've also seen an increase in social media activity, which is actually against the trend globally. So social media for news is going backwards or stagnating globally, where in Australia it's still increasing. We've just always been very big information consumers, and we're very early adopters of technology. And I think really it's also, and people, when we say how do you, people are accessing news more than once a day, but also how do you access news? Is it that you're bumping into it on social?
Yeah.
Or are you seeking it directly? I mean, you can access it in 101 ways, yeah. So if people are increasing their use of social, for instance, they may well also be bumping into more news.
Right.
Yep.
So
it depends on how you slice that, that bit of information, whether or not they're going straight to a website saying I'm seeking news and I'm going to go to the ABC website to seek news, or I'm going to Facebook to see what how my friend's holiday's going. Oh, and I bumped into a story along the way.
But what you're suggesting really is that there's an innate appetite for news and information within the wider Australian population, and all technology's done is enabled that to be
Totally.
got
That's
out
right.
a little bit more. And
That's right. And
it's
obviously
going
we're
a bit
seeing this
harder.
big increase in online use, and so the more you're going online, every time you're going online, then you're bound to bump into some kind of information, particularly, So I think we're just increasingly online, increasingly either, socially active and interacting with news incidentally or purposely that way, and or we're seeking it directly.
Now, you mentioned the T word, trust. And you said it's increasing, trust.
I know, look,
in
maybe
media?
surprise, surprise. So the trust in news has gone up this year. So last year, for our survey, it was at about 42%, and that was low. It had dropped a little bit for last year. This year, it's gone up to 50%. And
Now, how does that compare with the rest of the world?
there's been a rise, a small rise in other countries, but on the whole, we're fairly standard. We're kind of at a global average there for around trust, where we used to be below it.
Right.
So why has that happened? I think that it's partly to do with the fake news scare.
Right.
That's been a big debate here. We're big social media users, even though the debate around fake news has primarily been in America. We seem to cover American politics more than we cover our own. I mean, it dominates every bulletin you go to. So there's been a lot of debate about it, and I think that what's that? And Edelman showed a similar thing. So the Edelman Trust Survey showed a similar thing globally as well. That what that has done is increase trust in mainstream media.
Yes.
So the trust in social media,
Mastheads.
that's right, in those legacy media brands, trust is up.
Yeah.
Trust is down in social. So when I say trust in news is at 50%, that's in, absolutely. But if you ask for trust in news on social media, it's at 24%.
Yeah.
And that's down from last year.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's happening. And like I say, Edelman shows that shift as well between mainstream news. Their distinction is between journalism and social.
Yeah.
Ours is between, traditional news brands and social media. Also, we ask it about trust of news online, and that's around 34. So it's still much lower than traditional news brands.
Now, this is about news and the media, but it doesn't get into trust in government, though, does it?
It doesn't. No, we don't look at that specifically. But again, if you look at Edelman and for this year for Australia, trust in government is pretty low, and I think it's dropping. Interestingly, I think trust in business and CEOs, that had gone up a little bit for Australia from the Edelman report, and trust in media again was low that they recorded there. A report that was done by IGPA, the Institute for Government Policy Administration at UC last year or the year before, it showed that trust in politics was very low, about 2 years ago. So
how do we as government communicators help to fix that?
Look, I think government communicators have a real problem, actually, but because, where does politics end and government communications start? And as professional communicators, we understand the difference between a politician's press secretary and someone who works in a department and trying to get out, health information about new tobacco tax or whatever. Yeah. We understand the differences, but I think for the average citizen, I think that distinction's really hard. I think that the issue of trust is really difficult because government comms for citizens isn't that, their understanding of it isn't that nuanced.
Yeah. Well, sure. The way I've always looked to try to explain it to people is that it's the role of the politicians to advocate, but it's the role of the government department to explain. Yeah. What is the policy? What is the program? What is the regulation? Here's the detail. Here's the information, and to present it in the most compelling and interesting way possible. I think there's that differentiator there. Yeah. But I do take your point that someone sitting out in general population land is probably not going to see it that way. They probably see it all as one.
Well, I think so. Particularly, for instance, if you rely on TV and what you're seeing is government ads promoting or whatever, and okay, it might be an information ad, but it's still promoted by somebody and sponsored by somebody, and it's coming over, and it's still policy from a partisan, from a political party. Whether that, yes, it's implemented by a government, but it's still something from the government of the day. And I just think, politicians are on the nose. And so I do think that there is an issue there. If you can absolutely play it straight, if we can absolutely make sure there is, really no spin in it. I mean, that hangover from the 80s, the whole, that spin, 20 years of spin, completely ruined, any sense of authenticity and trust in government comms. I mean, you've got to play it so straight, because I think it's still tainted from that era, and I think there is distrust, and I think that on the whole, people are completely still sick of slogans.
Yeah.
They just want really straight information.
Now, interestingly, also the survey, just returning to the audience, that people are reluctant to sort of get involved more in political views, to express their views. What's that about?
It is interesting. So, there was a question asked this year about whether or not people whether they were concerned about expressing their political views on social media.
Right.
And we found, interestingly, that people in Australia are more concerned about this than in since not all other countries, but in many other countries, and particularly amongst young people. And we asked them about whether or not it was, are you I think the question was along the lines of, are you cautious about what you say because it might change the way either friends and family think about you, an acquaintance thinks about you, and or potential, employers and authorities might think about you. And they're concerned generally. And it's interesting, I did a talk back on Triple J Hack about this the other day.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting listening to the callers, because we can look at the data and we can interpret it the best we can, but actually speaking to young people who had strong views about it was fantastic. And it supported our suppositions.
I did.
Yeah, that, look, primarily, I mean, if anyone's got a kid at school, actually huge awareness around your digital footprint, really, and your digital, reputation.
And the legacy of...
The legacy, that's right. So, you don't want to put up a nude selfie. Well, you might want to if you're trying to get a job at Playboy. But if you're not, very few other employers are going to find that as a, as a great item to have on your digital CV. So, so people are very mindful, young people are very mindful about their digital reputation. So that's one thing. The other thing is that because we have such a high percentage of young people using social media, and they've been doing it for a long time, they're very aware of the negative online culture. And so people are cautious about trolling and just, being kind of attacked, really.
Yeah. Is that changing at all? Is that softening at all?
Because don't know. Look, in my experience, to be honest, I find a lot of the social media culture so appalling.
Yeah.
I use it less and less. I use it for research purposes.
Yeah.
But as a place to go for information and actually interact with people, I can't stand it. It's so negative.
Yeah.
So and I'm sure I'm not the only person who's found it that way.
Yeah.
Look, but the other thing with these young people, why they might be a bit reluctant, is also for many people, they just want to keep social.
Yeah.
They don't want to discuss politics there.
Yeah.
They want to go and talk about movies or whatever and share memes and find out about someone's holiday. Yeah. So, I mean, we do know that, yes, of course there's a cohort of highly interested, engaged people aged 18 to 24. But actually, on the whole, we also know that those people who rely on social media for news and are there and are young, they are less interested in news, they're less interested in politics, and so maybe they just want to keep it social.
Okay. Now, anything else that we haven't picked up?
I think one of the demographics we haven't talked about, and I think as a communicator really important, is the urban regional split.
Right.
So and I think for government communicators, we have to really think about this. So what it shows that whilst we've got this big gallop on, towards mobile and online for urban communities, it's not. I mean, it's much slower for the people in regional and remote areas.
That's connectivity.
Connectivity,
based?
we assume, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just lack of choice as well. And so they're very dependent on.
But the bandwidth's not there.
No, that's right. Bandwidth's not there. So they're not using their mobiles as much, and they're not online as much. So they're still relying much more on TV and where they can papers, but much more TV because in fact in many places they haven't got a local paper anymore.
Yeah.
And trust in news information, news is lower as well in those areas, and we think possibly as well because of the decline in local news services and things that maybe it's a relevance issue, that they're not getting as much information that they feel is relevant to them.
Yep.
So I think that's hugely important for people to take on board. So whilst we say the gallop away towards mobile and online, okay, for this cohort, but you've got to then, again, tailoring. There's no one way. It's got to be individual. It's got to be on a postcode basis, not because of not based on electorate lines, but based on, connectivity really. Yeah. And so I really wouldn't forget that. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating insight, because often, there is a need to, same story, but if there's different ways to get it there. But as you say, it comes back to the audience. Where, how are they getting their information, and then how can you turn up in a way that's relevant to them, that they will give you some consideration to hand over a bit of their time and their attention. Well, fascinating stuff once again.
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Any other sort of major surprises? Anything else there that you sort of thought to yourself, yeah?
Yeah, one of the things that we asked this year about news literacy, and we hadn't kind of looked at that before.
What's that?
Yeah, what's news literacy?
What is news literacy?
Well, it's about how much knowledge people bring to the table with them, really, when they go to consume information. So news in this case. Right. And so it's not a current affairs test. It's not, gee, what happened last week? Who's the president of Russia or whatever. It's not that type of information. It's really about understanding the information environment, and so that it can help you interpret the news that you're using.
And it's up?
No, Australia's news literacy is really low in comparison to other countries.
Oh.
Ours is bad.
Oh.
Yeah, it's around about 34%. So, I mean, not that our method is foolproof, but one of the ways of measuring news literacy, and there is no one way, there's lots of ways, but one of the ways is that you do ask questions about the information environment. So, for instance, they asked a question about the funding of the ABC. Was it, was it funded by advertising, or did it receive government funding, for instance? And another question was about Facebook and about, how was the news selection decided? Was it by a person or an algorithm? This type of thing. And then there was another question about public relations and the different there.
So quite specific questions.
They were specific questions, but what they were getting to was how much do you understand about communication environment, and therefore helps you, how do you therefore interpret the information you're receiving? Yeah. And really low on the whole. Like I say, about 30% of people got those answers right.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
So only 30% people knew that the ABC didn't receive advertising; it was actually funded by taxes. I mean, that's pretty bizarre. Yeah. I mean, worrying, really. The whole thing about Facebook and the algorithm. Very few people understood that, and given how much debate there's been around that, I found that quite surprising. I was less surprised about people not understanding the kind of distinct role of PR from, say, news. We who work in the comms industries, of course, think that's blindingly obvious. Yeah. So that didn't surprise me so much, but those other two really surprised me. Yeah.
So where can people get access to the whole report? Because as you said before, they might want to go through the whole thing and have a look at it. Not just your version of it.
Yeah, and hopefully mine's accurate. Okay, so you can find it in two places. One is on Australian Policy Online, APO.
Okay.
And
APO.org.
I think it is. Is it .au? I can't. Don't ask me that.
Just Google it.
So Australian Policy Online, it's there, and it's also, if you go to the News and Media Research Centre at the University of Canberra, you'll find a link to it.
Okay.
And that'll actually send you off to.
And so there's a bit of the research, and there's also some insights from a lot of the other.
There's commentary in there as well, and. Look, it's a really meaty report this year. It's, nearly 100 pages. And so for some people, it'll be far too much, and there are dot points for those and an executive summary for those who don't want to read further. But what we found is actually that our reports have been really used quite a lot and referred to a lot in the policy space. And so we've been increasingly providing more and more information. So there's a lot of graphs and a lot of data in there for those who want it.
I'm not sure whether I should be scared or whether I should be optimistic, but I think I will go and have a lie down because it is just like that. That's just how I feel pretty much most days, trying to work this whole show out. And I'm not sure, I think you make a good point. I'm not sure it's going to change anytime soon. So anyway, let's get used to it. Those of us who work in the government communications business. So, Assistant Professor Caroline Fisher. How do you become a full professor?
Oh, that's a discussion for a glass of wine another day and probably off the record. You have to go for a promotions process.
Okay.
And, I've got a couple of years before I have to do that.
Very good. Well, good luck with that. And to you, the audience, thank you very much for coming by once again. Truly appreciate it. If you would like to go to your favourite podcasting app and rate and review the show, that would help other people to discover it, which we would be very grateful for. Great insights, I think, in that interview there with the assistant professor, and really so much information. So duck across to apo.org.au. So thanks again for coming by this week, and I will be back at the same time next week. But for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.